Welcome back to Walnut Springs. My name's Mike, and today I want to show you how to take apart a three-piece crank. Let's get to it. The tools that you're going to need to remove and reinstall your crank arms are going to be an 8mm Allen key, a crank arm remover tool, possibly a 17mm wrench depending on the crank arm remover tool that you have. If yours has a handle already built on it, you won't need this, but if it's like mine, you will need a 17mm wrench. And optionally, you can use a torque wrench. This torque wrench only goes up to 25 Newton meters, is not quite high enough for the crank arms. They require between 30 and 45 Newton meters. So we're just going to use good old strength and guesstimation with an Allen key. And the last thing you're going to want is a little bit of grease. To remove your crank set, it's really actually very simple when you break it all down. There's just a bolt at the end of this, and then it is pressed onto the bottom bracket that's on there. This particular bike has a square taper bottom bracket, which is pretty standard for a vintage bike or even a modern inexpensive bike. So let's go ahead and let's loosen this bolt. You'll just need your 8mm Allen key. Just put that right in there, and then you can use the leverage of the crank arm by pushing down and then pulling up on the Allen key. Remember that these threads are going to be loosen with counterclockwise, tighten with a clockwise motion. So there we go. Sometimes this bolt can be on there really tight, sometimes it can be loose. It should be roughly about 30 Newton meters, but sometimes it can be a little bit more, a little bit less, depending on how it was serviced. So now that we've got this bolt removed, you can kind of see what it's like. This is a very flat surface here, and why this looks so weird, how there's a tip, a rubber piece, and then another metal flat piece. This is actually the piece that presses the crank set back onto the bottom bracket. So you won't need any other tools other than the 8mm Allen key to put your crank set back on after it's been removed. This little guy will push it right back in place. Now that we've got that bolt out, let's go ahead and take a look. This is our crank set arm puller, and basically what it is, it's two parts. A part that's going to push on the bottom bracket. This is going to thread into the crank right here, and then this part is going to do the pushing once we get this threaded onto the crank. For this particular one, a square taper bottom bracket, this piece pops off, and this is what we'll need. This would be for a different style bottom bracket that would have a little bit wider connection. We're going to go ahead and thread our tool on right here and do this by hand until the threads fully connect, because you do not want to strip this out at all. And it should thread in really smoothly. I guess if you had a little bit of problem with it, you could add a little bit of grease, but that usually isn't necessary for this particular job. Once you've got that in there and you can't hand tighten it anymore, we'll go ahead in this particular instance and get our 17mm wrench, and we're just going to tighten it until we basically it's almost like a little bit more than hand tight. Okay, and if you haven't already, you can either remove your chain or you can just drop it off the crank set. Now that we've got our chain off, let's go ahead and we'll tighten this down. If you can hand tighten this, go ahead and do that until you can't anymore. Sometimes this can be a very hard process depending on how long it's been since this crank has actually come off this bike. But we'll just keep turning this, and this will slowly start pushing that crank arm off. So you want to make sure you're holding on to it so it doesn't just fall. As you can see, it's getting a little bit easier. Here we go. It should be coming off here real quick. Yep, there we go. Now we just need to remove the tool and repeat this process for the other side. Now we're ready to go ahead and reinstall our crank set. One thing that I would recommend doing is just apply a little bit of grease to this spindle. Doesn't take much, just a little bit, and then you can go ahead and install your crank. You want to make sure that you don't install both arms on the down position. One needs to be at the 6 o'clock and then 12 o'clock position. Now we're ready to go ahead and reinstall the bolt. It's important that you add some grease to these threads before installing it. And then just use your 8mm Allen key to start the threading process on this. Now remember, this particular bolt is actually going to be doing the pressing of the crank arm back onto the bottom bracket. So you are going to have to get it pretty tight. This is where if you have a torque wrench that can go from 35 to 45 Newton meters, it's recommended that you use that. Now I know a lot of people don't have those, so you can just use your best judgment, get it nice and snug where it feels like it's pretty tight, because you don't want your crank arms falling off in the middle of the ride. I've seen that happen a time or two. So you can use the crank arm as a way to get a little bit more leverage on it. We're just about there, I think. And yeah, there we go. Now we're ready to reinstall our chain, and then we can get out on the road. And there you go. That's how you take apart your 3-piece crank on a bike. It's really simple and you really don't need a lot of tools. I hope that you found this video helpful. If you did, hit that like button, leave me a comment below. And if you haven't already subscribed, go ahead and subscribe. And if you saw a tool in this video that you don't have, but you're gonna need to do this type of work, I'll put the links down in the description below. And if you click on those links, it does help out this channel and I greatly appreciate it. But as always, get out there, run, bike, build, and just have fun. We'll see you in the next one.